Welcome to TradeTheMBI.com. This is Jones Reports for the 10th, and so we talked about it. We were expecting to see a little bit of weakness going into the other day. We got the early morning rise, and then pretty much faded directly from there. Finished at the lows. What we were seeing was the continued fade of short-term buyers, still excellent, and no shorts whatsoever. But you can see now we've propelled to a whole new range here with the green midterm buyers. That's what's holding things up. Here's what you end up having is when you get to this kind of situation where you sort of get a softening of some buyers. We did achieve that 7.5 on a long-term buyer basis, but it begins to just soften a little bit before our next wave. Now, the question would be, will we get orange moving back above and cause us to have a much more significant short reading? At this point, not yet there. We're still just kind of like sideways, and that was because when you get too parabolic from the ABM yellow, it tends to want to mean revert back to, or at least close to it. The same thing happened, here in the run, you get back to it, you get away from it, comes right back to it. Now, when I say comes back to it, of course, it was rising just like this one is as well. So it hasn't plateaued, so this is still pretty strong overall. Much softer from a NASDAQ, and the potential is that, look at this with the NASDAQ, you're seeing below negative 7.5 with their short reading. I mean, that is just, crazy, because you know that it's going to be returning back there, but no sell signal yet. So it's fine to recognize it, nothing wrong with staying with it, it just means you adjust accordingly. So for the euro, we talked about this. We've got this positive extreme looking for the 189 range, still at 193, holding up there, but almost a complete reset of the shakeout right there. A little bit of a fade, but a perfect DOC spread, but on a reset of steel. The question is, will we see a turnaround, because we broke below the zero line with the long-term buyers? That could present a little bit more softness to come. And of course, now the worry of inflation is starting to finally create some attention, and that's going to be an interesting one, because it really comes down to, are we going to see for the first time in over a decade plus significant inflation as per the government's version of readings. We know that from the real world we've been seeing it for quite a while, since the end of last year, as oil began to come off of its lows. We know that this peak is certainly going to have an impact on prices throughout. We've also seen the acknowledgement of bonuses, and with the tax relief, there is going to be even greater liquidity available for spending. I mean, of course, with quantitative easing, the biggest confusion for most people, they talked about the liquidity, but it really wasn't all that much liquidity, in the sense that it was mostly moved into equity assets in the form of stocks and that, which ties it up. As people begin to exercise that, and if we get any form of a correction, you'll finally recognize that will actually be the first beginnings of a return of that liquidity into the market. And that is really what's going to generate the inflation. Most won't talk about it, but that is when it's actually going to materialize in real terms. And so it'll be an interesting one as it develops. Gold, we knew that it was within that short confine, right below the ABM yellow, didn't quite reach the green, so maybe has a little bit more to go, but look at that huge reset. That's a major decline in the short-term buyer range. Positive extreme-wise goes all the way back to the 122. I don't think that it's quite in that mode yet, because we haven't even seen the DOC spread yet because of the huge elevation here of the red DOC, meaning that buyers are still strong well above that zero line right down, but this means that there's a little bit more of an active short in gold. And since we talk about gold, let me go ahead and put up the Bitcoin futures, because we talked about this from the grand short, which we recognized. I gotta shrink it some more. All the way back over here, which was up near its middle peak after the first reach of the 20, and came back down, shot back up, put in another short signal. But we were talking about this from a steel standpoint and not seeing the reset. And you can see that even when we talked about it the other day, we just started to see a little bit of that reset, but nothing below the 13.5. in any of it, and that has maintained itself, and that's why even when we were up here, I said it wasn't going to do anything because it didn't have that reset, and sure enough, you're going to get little pops in between, but without that, there's no impetus for it to drive forward. It doesn't have the, I guess you would call it the momentum or the significant support underlying. And so it becomes a continuation move, not to mention the orange stain between the cyan and red in most cases throughout that ride, other than when we had the little pops that resulted in, well, a move to the 50% from the original buy. And but it's a powerful thing to see that, and I think that was a perfect chart that really represented it. So if we look at the 5K, it was just a steady little ride well above the 50%, but it was softer than most. I mean, we had some shakeout resets, got up to the peak, short signal right there, DOC spread all at the same time. It took place almost on a full reset of the steel. It happened just a fraction later, but it happened, and then it created a negative extreme below the red line, so we knew that those lows were likely to be revisited there. And sure enough, it just hovered across sideways for a little while before that began to take its toll, because you got no steel reset at all. Never came back down, and filled in those lows, but we had the rising lows on the Fibonacci, which typically wants to call to the low, and we just hit that, so spot on. Those are all great little techniques and pretty easy to see with that, and it's all getting incorporated into the adjustment paint bar that I'm doing that will manifest that clearly. So it's kind of exciting. It's a tough adjustment between being in a grand short versus knowing that even within that there's still going to be a rise, and the debate between whether or not it's okay to do that. And so because like even with the short little moves, a move back to 50% can still be a significant long within the grand overall short configuration. So it's a balancing act on some of those, and working out the preference on that. I don't know that it's a problem having the grand red and then maybe picking another color that will represent potential short dead cap bounces or slight reversals. So playing with that part of it has been a challenge. As always though, if there are relevant charts in that, I will put them up. As always though, trade well.